I'm going to start with Steve. Could each of you please share with us how you define product market fit? Steve, we're going to start with you.
Product market fit kind of starts with, an entrepreneur's instinct that there's a problem or a need that someone wants, and therefore they could figure out what product or service they need to deliver. And so the market refers on one side to the potential customers, and the product refers to what you think you're going to build to solve those needs or those problems. And that fit between you understood the customers well enough and the features of your product or service means you've kind of got product market fit. Sometimes, in fact, almost most of the time, you're just guessing. And so you kind of miss what the customers want, and therefore you don't have product market fit, and you spend a lot of money, and then you go out of business. So hopefully today we'll tell you how to get that correct.
I hope so. Thank you, Steve. Donna, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more with what Steve said. I mean, it is, that mismatch is a real challenge. So really understanding, who are these customers? Do they want what you're offering? It's more than, do they have a problem that theoretically could be solved? Does your proposed product actually solve that problem, and are they willing to pay you for it, right? So it goes also beyond features and function to be business model, pricing, how many of them are there enough of them to actually create a scalable company? So while we call it product market fit, it is really all about exploring, can you find that match where they want to pay for what you have and there's a business that can fall out of that?
Right. Okay. And Blake, how would you add to the product market fit definition?
Yeah, I mean, I think Donna and Steve, covered a lot of the basics, and so maybe just one example. So before I joined Harrison Harris Group, I was with a startup company, and we were commercializing an environmental protection coating for electronics. So basically, it would help make your electronics waterproof. And so in terms of the market, I mean, when we started, we envisioned, the entire electronics market, which is seemingly infinite. And to Steve's point, we didn't want to waste a lot of money, and we didn't want to go out of business. We wanted to be successful. And so we kept looking at the market and segmenting the market and trying to figure out exactly where our technology, it was a true scientific development, and so where its readiness fit with the electronics market. And so we looked at cell phones and laptops and tablets and automotive and solar cells. And what we found was really our first advantage and our first great fit was in two areas. It was in wearables, because they have extreme environmental exposure. And so for them, it was really a feature they were looking for. And the other was e-readers. And e-readers was a good fit for where our technology was ready. It was a relatively simple product compared to a cell phone. And they were looking to differentiate and add some functionality as well. So one, I'd say, was a good fit for our technology readiness, and one was a good fit for what their market need was. And so by attacking those first, the company, which is still going strong and doing really well, not out of business, growing every day, has really been able to now expand into other verticals kind of from those two initial markets.
Got it. Yeah, and actually just to add on what Donna was saying, it's not just that the customer wants what you have, but that it's actually a must-have need for them, right? That it solves a critical pain point. Because a lot of times you actually are solving a customer need, but in the hierarchy of problems they have every day, it sort of doesn't even factor on their radar scale. And for you to find something compelling, you need to be in those sort of like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, back in the really at the top of what really drives what I do every day, and hitting one of those must-have pains.
That's exactly right.
So thank you all for these excellent insights. They've actually prompted already quite a few questions from our viewers. So we're going to start taking questions from you, our online audience, and those of you that are gathered at viewing groups around the world. So a viewer today is asking, can you give some examples of common mistakes of product market fit from companies you've worked with? So I'm going to pass that off to you, Steve, to start off. So what are some common examples of mistakes?
Well, the biggest mistake that most entrepreneurs make is believing that they're visionaries when, in fact, all the data kind of concludes that most of you are actually hallucinating. And what that means is that all the thinking in the world in your office or with your friends or inside your building really doesn't count for much, because your customers are outside your building. And I think as our panelists know, and we kind of know now in Silicon Valley, the line is there are no facts inside your building, so get the heck outside. And so the biggest mistake is thinking that somehow you could pre-compute customers' needs, wants, and figure out product market fit from just thinking about it. And that's not what startups are about.
Right.
And you will most likely fail if that's how you approach it. That's the biggest failure mode.
Okay, great. You guys have other examples of mistakes?
I think that is spot on. And to dovetail on that, it isn't just that they're hallucinating and guessing, it's that we're skipping one of the most important parts often, which is the problem. And have I actually spent enough time on the problem so that when I'm actually starting to envision the product, I'm tackling a big enough problem, right? The entrepreneurs that we work with around the world, they're attached to an idea, they're attached to a particular way to solve the problem in front of them. And when they do discovery and they actually do get out of the building, they have blinders on. So they're missing vital cues that the problem may actually be bigger than they anticipated, that the customer may actually want something slightly left of center of what they're thinking. So the biases that entrepreneurs have when they go into doing these kinds of discovery interviews, when they actually get out of the building, can result in skewed results. And then I also see a lot of entrepreneurs that view the customer discovery process solely through the lens of product. What feature do I need to build for you to get you to buy the product? And they miss the opportunity to use that to ask vital questions around how they might want to pay for that, what the right pricing might be, what channels might I use. And so really thinking cohesively and comprehensively about the discovery process. It isn't just a race to get to a minimum viable product. It's really thinking holistically, is there a business here?
Right, and I think I'll add to that, Donna, that just, when you do customer discovery, I think one of the potential confusions is that you just have to talk to the person that you think is your customer, which you assume is maybe the user. But a lot of times what turns out, especially if you're in complex business-to-business markets, I'll take healthcare, for example, the person who uses the product may be the patient or the healthcare provider, nurse, or doctor who actually gives it to the customer, the user. But there might be a whole other set of parties that actually make the buying decision and who actually pay for it. So it might be a committee at the hospital that actually has to make the buying decision, and it may be a third party like an insurance company or an employer that's trying to make the decision about whether to pay for it. And if you just focus your questions around, hey, you user, would you like using this product? That only answers a subset of the questions. Right. And that the other questions might be, is anyone actually going to pay for this thing? This is a complicated market.
And is the hospital even the right customer? Is it big hospitals or little hospitals? Is it private clinicians' offices versus public health systems? Really understanding what's fact and what's fiction in the process is very, very important. And startup is nothing but a bundle of questions. So understanding where those assumptions are in the process so that you don't blindly move right past a core assumption that really was a foundational issue for your business. If you get that wrong, the whole thing falls apart.
How do I know if an idea for a startup is fitting for a specific market, like in Iraq? Where do I start? And I think this is a great example where we talk about customer discovery, right? So I think the most important thing all of us would probably say is don't start inside in your room talking to yourselves about what you think the market wants, because you're making a lot of presumptions about who the customer is and what really matters to them. So this is where Steve's mantra of get out of the building is probably absolutely the first start, but there's probably more specifics about what that really means. So when we talk about customer discovery, what are we saying? Like, what's really the process? And so Donna, you want to start in how do you direct startups?
Sure. So I think inherent in the question is an assumption, which is that Iraq is where you want to start. So I would label that as an assumption and not a fact. What is the rationale for that? Are there geopolitical reasons? In which case, okay, let's put that fence around it. If not, let's open that assumption up and poke at it a little bit. Get out of the building, go and meet with your customers, potential customers, not only people who you assume are your customers, but people who are adjacent to those people who are the antithesis of those people. You want to be exploring through as many and diverse conversations as you can be having to really figure out, am I making the right set of assumptions here? You also want to figure out what is unique about the landscape in your country. Is there some unserved need specific to Iraq that allows you, as Steve, I think, said so aptly, to create a clone market and take your product into market in a way that it might already be existing in another market, but geopolitical boundaries allow you as a local entrepreneur to take an opportunity and run with it where an outsider from outside your country couldn't. But the key, really, I can't say it enough, get out, go talk to people, everyone and anyone in and around the problem, to really explore whether there's someone other than you who thinks that there's a big enough problem and that your specific idea for solving it is a good one that they're willing to pay for.
Great. Okay. What method do you suggest to identify the best value proposition of a business idea? Okay, so this is about value propositions, and maybe we ought to define that term because it gets confused a lot. A lot of times when entrepreneurs go out to talk about their product to customers, they talk about the features or what the product actually physically does. So it's waterproof, or it has a red button, or et cetera, and you talk about what the product is capable of. But the thing that the customer really cares about is what that does for them, what the benefit is to them, right? Does it save me time? Does it save me money? Does it make me faster? That kind of thing. And that's what we talk about with a value proposition. And so the key thing here is the question of, well, great, how do I find out what the value propositions are? So do you guys have some examples of startups you've worked with and how they've gone about finding the best value proposition?
Yeah, I can just tie it back to that earlier example of the water protection company. I think it's a very clear one, and it was interesting to see as you got out there and talked with potential customers, which is, I think, one of the best ways to really understand and define that value for them is how different companies would approach value totally differently. You could go to one company and they would say, oh, this is environmental protection, so I'm going to get fewer returns on my devices due to water damage. That's great. It's going to lower my costs, and it's going to make my customers happy. And that's what they cared about. You could go to another company and say, wow, we've actually been struggling with our device and actually selling it because it requires environmental protection, and we haven't been able to achieve it at a high enough standard. So by adding your technology to our product, we're actually able to have a product ourselves. Right now they have something that's kind of deficient in the marketplace. And then occasionally, which was always surprising, you would walk into a company and you would say, we can help you with environmental protection. And they say, we have no problem with environmental protection. And you'd say, all right, well, you sell devices that are electronic into the marketplace. Do they fail from water? They said, yes. And you said, okay, so doesn't that mean you have a problem? They said, no, because we don't accept returns from water damage. And so we sell them. If there's a problem, it's not our problem. And so for them, we actually generated no value. And so it was, again, great to understand that. And then when we were thinking about segmenting the market, even when we thought we found the segment that was important, you still had to go more finite and understand, okay, well, what are your drivers for value for your customer? How is your business set up? Are you responsible for the returns or not? Have you outsourced that? And trying to understand their motivation was so critical in making the sale.
And then it turned out, right, that you have like a different approach now. It takes it to the next level. So when we're selling to that first group of customers, the marketing messages and the way we're going to go to market is about a very separate set of things than that second group. And then you also don't want to waste your time trying to find these third set of people who really aren't interested.
Yeah.
And so now you've got to understand what are the characteristics of this group versus this group versus this group that we thought at the beginning were all one group,
right,
so that we know who we're targeting, right?
And to your earlier point, example about the hospital system, is even within one customer segment, because we were selling to large corporations, different pieces of their corporation are going to see different value in the product, right? And so,
and frankly, probably different people, right? A hospital isn't a customer, right? Because it's a building, not a person,
exactly.
right? So it may turn out that the person who's responsible for building the product doesn't care because once it's out the door, it's not in his department, right? But it's the customer service department that gets maybe all the returns that cares about.
Exactly. And so I guess tying back to the question, again, just going out, talking to your customers, and asking those broader questions about motivation and trying to dig in on that is going to be so critical to understanding where your value fits in with their product and solution.
Great. Okay, so this question is Jamila from Bermuda. How do you determine when you have enough validation from customers in order to proceed with your new product? Is there a magic number that you need to shoot for? Wouldn't that be nice? So this is a great question, right? Okay, so I'm going out there, I'm asking all these questions. How do I know when I've got it? What is the defining moment for product market fit? Steve?
43.
We're done. Great.
easy.
Okay, cool.
So it turns out, obviously, it depends on the product and service. If you were selling enterprise software, that is $1 million software packages to large companies, if 5 of those people have given you $1 million orders, you could probably declare you have product market fit. On the other hand, if you had a product in the App Store or on the web and you got 5 orders, you could logically say, we don't have enough data. And so this also depends on not only the type of industry and market you're in, it also depends on what type of startup you are, because if in fact you have venture investors, they might be willing to take more of a risk than you would if this was your own small business. And so you also have to weigh risks, because your venture capitalists have 10 of you in their portfolio, but when you're a small business, you have 1 of you in your portfolio.
Great. Okay, cool. So the questions are coming in from all over the world, so I'm going to jump to the next one. If you focus on a particular customer segment, do you limit your opportunities and potential for market scalability? So Donna, why don't you, or Blake, looks like you've got an answer for that one.
I mean, I think in any sort of startup, usually you're limited by resources of some kind. It could be your time if it's just you, or your small team. It could be financial resources. And so we think it's very important to focus early on a product or a market segment. So focus is not a bad thing. I would say that as you scale and as you grow and as your resources grow with hopefully your market, it's okay to start to broaden. So you might perceive it as limiting at first, but if you can execute extremely well on a narrow focus, it's probably going to be much easier to broaden that focus later than trying to go after everything and diluting your resources and diluting your effort across the whole field.
Right. I mean, when I think about that elevator pitch at the beginning in those 2 to 3 slides that you talk about, I want to know what you're going to do now with the resources you have now to make it seem achievable and feasible to do it. But probably, like if Blake lets me get to like slide 8 or 9 of my 20-slide deck, I'm probably going to tell you, and hey, once I've achieved this, guess what these other markets are that I can go after. And so there's usually a vision for my product can do this for this huge group of people, but the reality is that there are baby steps to get there, and the first market I'm going to go prove my viability in is this, and then I'm going to grow to eventually be this great big company that can do all these things.
Absolutely.
But you really have to take it in steps. So our next question is, what kind of skills do you need to actually do that, to get out of the building and successfully find product market fit? And what if it turns out that you're not comfortable with the skills that are required, and how might you mitigate that challenge? So what do we mean by get out of the building and go ask these questions? What does that actually entail?
Well, I mean, much like everything, knowing what something is and being able to do it are 2 very different things. So I think it's important to recognize that for many entrepreneurs, particularly if you're more the product technical side, actually getting out and doing the interviews and talking to customers may feel intimidating. So getting comfortable with asking for someone's time, going in an unbiased way. Can you recognize your own biases and go in with the right language so that you're not biasing? So the communication skills and getting comfortable is often a challenge. I do think networks are a challenge for many people. They are picking markets where they may not have deep expertise, and they may not have hundreds of people they can immediately start interviewing, and that's also true in many of the cities and countries that our viewers are in. And that's where you have to get comfortable networking, asking for introductions, introducing yourself virtually or physically to people you might not know, and getting into a place where you can offer your ideas up but explore. And then I think the listening and interpreting is the other key skill. If you can let go of your biases on the front end, how do you also make sure that you're not biasing what you're hearing on the back end? Are you interpreting it correctly and analyzing what you're hearing to hear the trends of every time I mention X, their eyes open up and they ask how quickly they can have the product? You really need to be able to interpret what you're hearing well.
Can I just one personal story on the networking? When I started my career, I came out of a PhD program in material science. I was around a lot of brilliant scientists and engineers, which sometimes play into those stereotypes. And I was working with a gentleman who just had an amazing network and was just great at working the room and could go out and meet anyone. And I was just so impressed. And I said, wow, it would be really, how do you do this? It just must be born with it. And he said, no, I was totally introverted when I started. And I would set goals for myself, and you just get better at it. It's a skill that you can learn. And so when I was starting out, I said, okay, I go to a conference, I go to an event, or I go to a session at an incubator, and I say, okay, I'm going to collect 2 business cards. And then I'm going to go back into my shell and be uncomfortable at this event. But I can go out there and collect 2. And then the next month, all right, now I'm going to try to collect 3 and get 3 new contacts. And you do that enough, and over time now, it's not, I'm sure I'm still a little awkward, but I'm not as awkward as I used to be, and I can go out and make those connections and build that network. And so I just want to say to anyone out there, it is a skill. You can develop it. It's not something that you're born with. I mean, some people are, but not all of us are. And so it's okay.
Yeah,
but just go out
pushing
there
out of your comfort zone is
try
kind of
it.
part of the challenge here.
Yeah.
So.